In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to set up and install HomeAssistant on an Intel NUC Alternative. Specifically, we're going to be making use of Proxmox to do this, and if you stick around till the end, I'll be showing you how to migrate from your existing HomeAssistant setup over to this one. Check it out. What's going on, guys? I hope you're all doing well. Lots of HomeAssistant users start off their journey with a Raspberry Pi, but over time, as you fall deeper into the HomeAssistant rabbit hole, you'll be adding more integrations, adding more automations, and buying lots and lots of shiny new devices that you'll be assuring your wives you have to have. And when this happens, you may find you start outgrowing the Raspberry Pi and you'll be looking for other bits of hardware to move to. One common bit of hardware that the HomeAssistant community seem to recommend is an Intel NUC. We're going to be having a look at an alternative that's cheaper than a NUC, but it's going to give us more power than the Raspberry Pi, and we're going to be setting it all up within a virtual machine in Proxmox. For our NUC alternative today, we're going to be installing HomeAssistant on one of these, which is a HP EliteDesk 800 G1. The EliteDesk contains a 2 GHz Intel i5 4590T processor, which can be clocked to 3 GHz. It also contains 8 GB of DDR3 RAM and a 240 GB Kingston SSD. It also has 6 USB 3 ports and a gigabit Ethernet connection. Should you want any more information on this machine, I'll have a link to the official HP product description in my description below. So why might you want one of these as opposed to getting the NUC? You can pick one of these up from eBay for just over £50, and I have seen them listed cheaper and also more expensive. It all depends on the configuration of the machine that you get. But the main point there is the price, so it's a fraction of the cost of an Intel NUC. A brand new Intel NUC can cost you anywhere from £400 up to well over £1,000. You can also pick up second-hand or refurbished Intel NUCs for a much lower price point, some of which have similar or better specs than the HP EliteDesk, but I couldn't find any that had the same specs as the EliteDesk and were also just over £50. So for just over £50, you're going to be getting something that's got more power than the Raspberry Pi, and it's actually cheaper than this particular Raspberry Pi here on Amazon. You are also going to lose a couple of things when you upgrade from the Pi. So you're going to lose access to those GPIO pins, you're going to lose the built-in Bluetooth, you're also going to lose that tiny form factor that the Pi has, and also the PC is going to use more power than what the Pi does. Now, I'm not saying you should buy the EliteDesk over the Intel NUC. I actually happen to be a big Intel NUC fan, and I do have a HomeAssistant build video planned for it, but the EliteDesk is an alternative option, and it's also a much cheaper option. Before we start, I feel like I should give a little intro to what Proxmox is, just in case you don't know. So the Proxmox Virtual Environment, or PVE, is an open source server management platform that allows you to set up and manage virtual machines and Linux containers. It's free to use, but it does also offer a paid for subscription, which gives you access to features like the customer support portal or the enterprise repo. In our case, we're going to be sticking with the free edition, and we're going to be setting up HomeAssistant as a virtual machine. By using Proxmox, we can also maximize our hardware, so we can set up other virtual machines if we want to, or we can set up and run other bits of software within Linux containers. This is something you couldn't do before if you were just running the standard HomeAssistant OS on a Raspberry Pi. So that's what it is, and that's what we've got. So let's get into it. To get started then, we're going to first want to head over to the Proxmox website. You can find a link to this in the description below. And once we're here, we're going to want to download the latest Proxmox virtual environment. So let's go ahead and get that. For now, we're just going to save that to our desktop. With that now downloaded to our desktop, we're going to flash it to a USB in order to create a bootable Proxmox drive. To do this, we're going to be making use of a free bit of software called Balena Etcher. Etcher is free to download, and I'll have a link to it in the description below. With Etcher set up and installed, we're just going to want to open it up, and we're going to choose Flash from File. We're then going to find our Proxmox image, and we're going to select it. We're then going to choose Select Target, and we're going to select our USB drive. And once we've made those selections, we're just going to go ahead and hit Flash. This should just take a couple of minutes to flash the drive, but while you're waiting, if you're not already, hit that subscribe button and ding dong the notification bell. You'll then be alerted to any future videos that I do. Once Etcher completes, you'll see the flash complete message. We can then close Etcher down and safely remove our USB drive. We're then going to take the USB drive and insert it into the EliteDesk and power it on. As our machine's starting up, we're going to want to press the F10 key to open up our BIOS. From within here, we're going to want to check that Secure Boot is disabled and Legacy Boot is enabled. So in the BIOS along the top here, we're going to want to head to Security. And we're just going to use the arrow keys to navigate down to Secure Boot. And we're going to want to check that Legacy Support is enabled and Secure Boot is disabled. The other options you're going to want to enable in your BIOS are the Virtualization Technology and the Virtualization Technology Directed I/O. If all those settings match, you're going to want to just reboot the machine. This time when the machine boots, we're going to want to press the F9 key. It's then going to ask us which device we want to boot from. So we're going to want to select our USB drive and press enter. We should then hopefully be presented with the Proxmox welcome screen. And from here, we're going to want to just make sure that install Proxmox VE is highlighted. And if it is, we're just going to hit enter. That's then going to start installing Proxmox and getting everything ready for us. This might take a couple of minutes, so just leave it to do its thing. We'll then see the Proxmox license agreement, and we're just going to want to press agree in the bottom right corner here. We're then just going to select the hard drive that we're going to install Proxmox on. If you've only got the one drive in your machine, then you'll only see the one drive. So in my case, I've just got the one Kingston 240GB SSD. So that's selected there, and I'm just going to choose next. You then just need to set your country, time zone, and keyboard layout. You then just need to set a password and an email address. The password needs to be at least 8 characters in length and contain both a mix of letters and numbers. And the email address will be used by Proxmox to send you any notifications or alerts, such as backup failures and things like that. Following this, you're going to want to set your hostname and IP address. I've just called mine pve.local, but you can call yours whatever you want. If you've got your machine plugged into your network, then the gateway and DNS settings should automatically pick up, but you can further configure them here if you want to. And with all of that set, you're going to want to just choose next. Following that, we're going to be presented with a summary screen. So from here, you can just check that all the settings you've entered are correct. And if you're happy with them, you're going to want to press that final install button. Proxmox is then going to start working its magic, and it should just take a couple of minutes for that to finish. Once that finishes, your machine should reboot and Proxmox should automatically start. You can then connect to Proxmox using the IP that was either assigned or the static IP address you gave it. So you're going to want to enter that IP address followed by :8006. You'll then get this warning message telling you that the connection's not private, and the reason for this is just because there's not a valid SSL certificate on our Proxmox server. To get around this, we're just going to press on advance, and then we're going to choose continue. We should then be presented with the Proxmox web interface where it's going to ask us to log in. We're going to log in with the username root, and the password is going to be the password that we set during the installation process. Once you've entered those, just hit login. That should then log us in, and we should get a pop-up telling us that we don't have a valid subscription. We're going to see this message whenever we make any big changes within Proxmox or whenever you log in. It can be a little bit annoying, but it's not really a big deal because you're getting the software for free and you can get rid of the message by just pressing OK. Before we do anything within Proxmox, I'm just going to add two-factor authentication. Now, this is an optional step, so if you want it, then do it, and if you don't, then don't. To add two-factor authentication, I'm just going to click my user at the top right here. I'm then going to choose TFA. That should then present you with a QR code that you can scan with your Authenticator app. You then just need to enter the verification code and then you're done. Before we set up and create our HomeAssistant virtual machine, we're going to want to just check that everything's up to date. To do this, we're just going to choose our Proxmox server, and then we're going to want to press update and then choose refresh at the top. We'll see the no valid subscription pop up and we'll just choose OK. And what this should then do is just check for any updates that our machine needs. Just give that a second to fetch any new updates and packages it needs. At the end of it, if you see an error message like this, then don't worry. The reason it failed to fetch the package is just because we don't have a full enterprise license. So once this is done, we can just hit close. The page should then reload and it should display any updates and packages that we need to install. To upgrade these packages, we're just going to press the upgrade button at the top. This is then going to pop up a little terminal window where it's going to ask us to confirm the upgrade. So we're just going to want to hit the Y key and enter. If you get a message asking you about the console encoding, you're going to want to just choose UTF-8 and hit enter. We're then also going to choose English and enter, and that should then just carry on with doing its upgrades. Once this finishes, you can just close that terminal window, and you'll know that it's finished because you'll see a message that says your system is up to date. Back in the Proxmox web interface, we're just going to hit refresh again, and all of those updates and packages should now disappear because they're all installed. Now that we've got our updates done, let's go ahead and create the virtual machine for HomeAssistant. So up at the top there, we're going to choose Create VM. The node selected here is going to be the machine that you install the VM on. Now, I've only got one machine in my data center, but with Proxmox, you can have multiple different ones. So if I had more machines there, I could select a different node to actually install the VM on. We're then going to want to set the VM ID and the VM name. The VM ID is unique to each VM and it starts off at 100. The name is just a friendly name to help you identify your virtual machine. So we're going to leave it on 100 and we're just going to go with the name HomeAssistant. We're then going to want to check the advanced box. And we're going to choose Start at Boot. With that selected, we're going to just press Next. And we're going to choose Do Not Use Any Media. And Next. With the system options, we're pretty much going to keep them as default, apart from the BIOS, which we're going to change to UEFI. So in the drop down there, you're going to want to just select UEFI. And then it's going to ask us for the storage. For this, you're going to press the drop down again. And you're just going to choose Local LVM. We can then press next and it will take us into the hard disk. And for the hard disk, we're just going to skip over this as we're going to be setting all of this when we come back to actually setting up HomeAssistant. The setup for the CPU is going to vary depending on the hardware that you're making use of. So it could be 4 cores, 8 cores, 12 cores, and so on. We're not going to be going into best practices for setting up CPUs on your VM, so we're not looking at time slices or optimization or anything like that. So for now, just for this demo, I'm just going to assign it all the available cores for this demo machine. So this particular CPU has 4 cores, so I'm just going to give the VM all of those 4 cores. I do plan on doing a more advanced config and setup of the VM in the NUC video, so if you're interested in that, be sure to check that out whenever it releases. The rest of those, I'm just going to leave as default, but if you want to tweak around with those, then go ahead. And when you're happy, just press next. For memory, we're going to want to specify how much RAM we're going to want to assign the VM. In this case, we're setting up HomeAssistant, and HomeAssistant has a minimum requirement of 2 gigs. So I've set my minimum here to be 2 gigs, and I've set my maximum to be 6. Next up, we've got the network tab. From within here, you can set some of the specialized network settings, such as VLAN tagging and rate limiting. I'm just going to keep all of these default and hit next. We're then going to be presented with a small summary of all the settings that we've chosen. So just have a quick skim through those and make sure you're happy with them all. Also make sure you haven't ticked the start after created, as we don't want to start it just yet. And if you're happy with all of those things, hit finish. In the file tree on the left here, if we expand our server, we should now see that HomeAssistant VM that we just created. And we can see it here, and if you hover over it, you'll see that it currently says the status is stopped. If we select it, we can see some of the information about it, so this will be useful when it's actually running and live. Now, as it's currently stopped, we can't see any live data or information about it. So we've now got the HomeAssistant VM set up, but we currently don't have HomeAssistant installed on it. So what we're now going to need to do is just get that HomeAssistant image and get it added. So we're going to head over to the HomeAssistant webpage to find the download that we want. And the one that we want is this .qcal2 file for Proxmox. So we're just going to click that, and we're just going to download it and save it to our desktop again. With that downloaded, we're now just going to need to extract the contents of the file before we pass it to Proxmox. Now, I'm using WinRAR, but you can use whichever file unarchiver or extractor you want. So I'm just going to right click it and extract it to a folder. I've now got that image extracted on my desktop and I'm ready to pass it to Proxmox. To actually pass it to Proxmox, I'm going to be using a program called WinSCP. WinSCP is another free open source bit of software. Its main function is to just transfer files between a local and remote computer. In this case, it's going to be to transfer the files from our computer to our Proxmox server. If you're interested in using WinSCP, I'll have a link for the download in the description below. With WinSCP set up and installed, we're going to open it up. When it first opens up, it's going to ask us to create a new session. So we're just going to fill this in now. For the session, we're going to leave it as SFTP. And for the host name, we're going to enter the IP address of our Proxmox server. You're then also going to want to enter your username and password. Now, I'm still making use of root here, but if you have already set up an additional user, you could use that as well. So go ahead and enter those details and make sure it's on port 22. We're then just going to press login. As it's the first time connecting to our Proxmox server, we're going to get a warning pop up, and that's just because the host key is not in our cache. So we're just going to press yes on this. That should then connect, and what we've now got on the left here is the files on our computer, and on the right we've got the files that are on the Proxmox server. On this left hand side, so the files that are currently on our computer, we just need to navigate to where our HomeAssistant file is. So I've got the file that I just extracted, and I'm just going to drag it across to the Proxmox server. So on the server, it should appear underneath root. So let's do that now. And once that's done, you should now see that file on the right hand side. With that copied across, we're going to come back to the Proxmox web interface and we're just going to click on our server. We're then going to choose shell. And we now just need to enter a command in order to import that file into Proxmox. The command we're going to want to enter is qm import disk, followed by the ID of the VM that you're setting up. So in my case, it was 100. You're then going to list the file path to the HomeAssistant file that you copied across to the server, followed by local -lvm, followed by -- format qcal2. And that command will also be in the description below. Just make sure you enter the right ID for your VM and also the correct file path to where your file is located. With that done, let's go ahead and press enter. That will then import, and you should then see this successfully imported disk message at the bottom. As that installation file has now been imported into Proxmox, we can remove it from the root directory. So let's just right click on that and delete. Just here you can see that the disk was imported as an unused disk. So now we need to make this the used disk. So let's do that now. So we're going to want to select our VM and select hardware. We can see that disk that we just imported at the bottom here. So it's currently unused, and what we now need to do is make this the main disk. To do this, we're going to detach the current hard drive. So we're going to select hard disk and we're going to click detach. We're then going to get a pop-up asking us if we're sure we want to detach the hard disk, and we're going to choose yes. So disk 0 is the one that we want, and disk 1 is the one that we just detached. So let's just select disk 1, and we're going to click remove. And for that removal confirmation, we're just going to press yes. We're then going to double click on our unused disk 0, and we're just going to press add. With our disk now in place, we just need to adjust our boot order, and then we can start up Home Assistant. So in the left hand side there, we're going to want to go to options, and we're going to choose boot order. And from here, you can see our drives at the bottom, and it's not currently selected. So what we're going to want to do is drag that up to the top and just select it. Now that that's set, we can finally start Home Assistant. So up at the top, we're going to press start, and that's going to kick off the VM. But to actually see what's going on in the background, we're going to need to open up the console. So on the left hand side there, we're going to choose console, and we should hopefully see a familiar Home Assistant log. After a few seconds, we should hopefully see the Home Assistant ASCII art letting us know that the supervisor started running. We can also see the IP address that Home Assistant's going to be running on. So if we enter that in the browser now, we should have access to Home Assistant. So if we enter that IP address in our browser now, followed by :8123, we should be presented with Home Assistant. If you were following along setting up Home Assistant for the very first time, you'll now be done. All you'll need to do is just enter a few details and your account and everything will be created. But what I'm going to do now is show you how you'd move an existing Home Assistant across to the new one on the Proxmox server. So there's two different methods you could use. You could use this snapshot restore link here, which would allow you to just upload a snapshot and restore it like that. Or you can create an account and then do the restore. For me personally, I like to just create a temporary account. That way, if there's any issues with restoring the snapshot or anything like that, you can access the logs easily and just view what the problem is. So let's just quickly run through this then, fill in all these steps. And just like that, we're on our Home Assistant dashboard on our Proxmox server. Now that we've got Home Assistant up and running on our Proxmox server, we want to go into our existing Home Assistant and create a full snapshot. To do this, we're going to go into the supervisor, and along the top, we're going to click snapshots. And then in the bottom right here, we're going to click create snapshot. We then just need to give the snapshot a name. So I'm just going to call this full backup. We're going to want to make sure that full snapshot is ticked, and we can optionally then create a password for it if we want to. For now, I'm just going to click create. And this should just take a couple of minutes to create the full backup of our Home Assistant instance. We're then just going to get the copy of this and put it on our desktop, and then we're going to add this to the Proxmox server. Okay, that snapshot's just finished, so what we're going to do now is download it. So at the top of my list here, the full backup, I'm just going to click it. I'm then going to press the three dots in the bottom right corner there, and I'm going to click download snapshot. I'm then just going to save this to my desktop where I'm going to access it in a second. Now that I've got that backup, I can fully shut down this existing Home Assistant as I'm not going to be using it. We're now back in our Home Assistant VM on our Proxmox server, and we're now basically going to just do the opposite to what we just did. So in the Supervisor tab, under Snapshots, we're going to click the three dots in the top right corner. And this time we're going to press Upload Snapshot. We then just need to navigate to where we just saved that. So I saved mine on the desktop, so I'm going to find it now. And then I'm just going to click Full Backup and open. Depending on the size of your Home Assistant instance, it will take either a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes to upload, but just give that a chance. And when it is complete, you'll be presented with a screen like this where you can optionally do a full snapshot restore or a partial snapshot restore. As we want everything, we're going to want to make sure that full snapshot's ticked, and we're just going to click restore. It's then going to ask us if we're sure we want to do this, as it's going to wipe the existing Home Assistant out, and we're just going to click restore. And we can see in the bottom left there that we've been disconnected from Home Assistant, so we now just need to wait for this to actually rebuild our Home Assistant based on that snapshot. If you just give that a few minutes, once the restore's complete, the page should refresh and you should be greeted with the Home Assistant login page. You can then log into the account that you previously used. Okay, so Home Assistant is now up and running, and we've got access to all of our devices, our integrations and add-ons, but we don't have access to our Zigbee network. And the obvious answer for this is because we haven't plugged in our coordinator. So let's go ahead and plug that in now, and I'll show you how you add USB devices to your VM. This is actually a lot easier than what you think it would be. So we're going to jump back into Proxmox, and we're going to want to make sure we've selected our VM. We're then going to want to choose hardware in the second tab. And from here, we're going to click add in the top left, and we're going to choose USB device. We then want to select use USB vendor/device ID. And from here, we're going to choose a device to pass through. So if we select the drop down menu, we should see any USB that we've currently got plugged in. So I can see that I've got this USB receiver, which is for a wireless mouse that I've got plugged into the server. And I've also got the Conbee II stick, which is what I want. So I'm going to select the Conbee II there. We then just need to press add, and in the top right, just next to the shutdown button, we're going to press the little arrow, and we're going to choose reboot, and then press yes. When Home Assistant comes back to life, you should now have access to your Zigbee network again. And if you head into your supervisor and open up the hardware option, you should be able to do a search for your Zigbee coordinator. So in my case, it's the Conbee II. So if I start typing Conbee, I can see the Conbee II here, and I can see that it's now accessible by HomeAssistant. And my Zigbee lights are also now available again, so I can go back to toggling these on and off as I would before. And there we go, guys, that's just about everything. So just to quickly summarize, we had a look at how we can go about setting up our own Proxmox servers on our own machines. We had a look at an Intel NUC Alternative, which is much cheaper. We then had a look at how we go about setting up our own HomeAssistant VM on our Proxmox server. And we also had a look at how you can add your own USB devices to the VM. If you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, then don't forget to drop me a like. And if you're not already, hit that subscribe button and ding dong the notification bell, and you'll then be alerted to any future video that I do. As always, a massive thank you to these awesome dudes. If you're interested in supporting my channel and becoming one of these awesome dudes, then there'll be a link to my Patreon in the description below. All of the funds go towards future videos and projects, and there's also a couple of perks for Patreon members. So thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.